A huge Mexican welcome to Steve's Kitchen. We're continuing the Mexican series today by looking at tortilla chips or corn chips. Here in Australia we call them all corn chips. They're not really the same. Tortilla chips are when you take tortillas and fry them. Corn chips can be made with pretty much any sort of corn flour shaped into chips and fried. Now in my opinion, tortilla chips just taste so much better. They're made with a nixtamalized corn, and if you don't know what that is, we'll be talking about that in a later episode and learning all about nixtamalization of corn. So look out for that video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you get notified. If you want to use just store-bought, then you can jump ahead. I'll put the time code up here so that you can go ahead and watch the next process. But if you're fascinated to make your own tortilla chips, and trust me, they are going to taste really good, then we're going to go ahead and make them for you now. You may well ask, why on earth would you bother making your own tortilla chips when they are so readily available in the stores? Now, I'll tell you, in Australia here, a lot of our corn chips are not tortillas. By the time you buy those bags and you open them up, all you've got is a bag of crumbs in there. They've broken apart. They're not often strong enough to get into the dip and lift it out without snapping. If you make your own, they will be entire and they will taste delicious and they will look really good. If that wasn't a good enough reason on its own, I can tell you also experimenting with flavors of tortilla chips, your own flavors, is just outstanding, and we'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of the process. So come on, what are you waiting for? Let's get and make our own homemade tortilla chips. So here are the store-bought tortillas. You can see they're probably a little bit thinner than my homemade tortillas, where similar size, mine might be a little bit smaller. But these ones seem to be, when I fry them up, really just full of water. They actually go thinner than these ones do when they're cooked. And you can see from the homemade ones just how natural and delicious they're going to taste. For fear of repeating myself, we are using Masa Flour to make these tortilla chips. This is not corn flour or cornstarch. This is a nixtamalized flour. What does that mean? It means it tastes really good. We will keep this process nice and quick and simple for you. 1 cup or 125 grams of our Masa Flour. I do like to season my tortillas with a little bit of salt. Now we are going to be seasoning the tortilla chips, so you might want to leave the salt out. We're going to add in there 2/3 of a cup of water. Then I'm just going to take a fork and start to bind this dough together. Now, a few seconds, I'm just going to pull the fork out of there and get my hands in and start to draw this dough together. Now, it is going to come very quickly away from the side of the bowl, and it'll form together in a nice, soft and slightly crumbly dough. I like to cover that dough over with a damp cloth and give it about 15 minutes for the flour to bloom, let it absorb some of that moisture. Once we've allowed the flour to bloom and develop a little bit, we're going to divide the dough up into 8 small pieces and roll it up into a little ball. Now you really could do with a tortilla press. I've actually got a Puri Press, it's an Indian press, very similar. And we want to put it between 2 pieces of plastic and press it down. If you haven't got a press, you could use a heavy casserole dish. And I'm using the plastic bags that come from the butchers. A lot of people use Ziploc bags and they just cut them open. I find the butcher's plastic works really well. We do want to get these as thin as possible. Next, you're going to want a cast iron griddle or a cast iron pot or a comal. And we're going to place our tortilla into the pan. It's important at this point you keep an eye on it. We only want it on there for about 15 to 20 seconds. Now get something thin underneath the tortilla and flip it over, and we're going to sear the other side. You can see it's still quite blonde and quite soft. Effectively, it's like searing a steak. We're making a skin either side. Now, after 10 or 15 seconds, we're going to turn that over again. And by just pushing gently around the side, you'll see it starts to puff open and we're getting beautiful lamination, which is exactly what you want for the perfect tortilla. Now, it's 4 turns in total, so I'm just going to turn this one more time. We get a little bit of color on the underside, and we're going to get a little bit of color on this side. And then just lift that off, pop it onto any flat surface, and we're going to stack our tortillas on there. And as they cool down, they're going to get lovely and soft and supple. You might want to cover them over with a damp towel just to stop them from drying out. So we've got this lovely little stack of hot tortillas, and in all honesty, you should eat these now. Make them into quesadillas, little carnitas. The original idea was to take slightly older tortillas and fry them into tortilla chips. Lucky for you, I've got a batch here, which were made earlier on, so they're a little more stale. You can see how beautiful and soft. I've also got, for those of you that want to follow with the pack, I've got some packs here. I just prefer the taste of these ones, so I'm going to use these ones to make my chips. So we've got a little stack of tortillas here. Get a nice sharp knife, and what we want to do is just cut through them. And because my tortillas are small, I'm going to just cut it into quarters. So we've got chips that are this sort of size. If I were going with the store-bought ones, I would probably cut them up into 6 like that. So we get tortilla chips that are approximately that sort of size. Now we want to fry our tortilla chips. I'm going to do between 8 and 10 at a time, and ideally we want to fry these in some corn oil, but any vegetable oil will do. I'm doing a fairly small batch here. Of course, if you've got a purpose-made fryer, you could do it in there and do a lot more at one time. Want a fairly high heat on the oil, about 170 to 190 Celsius. That's about 340 to 375 Fahrenheit. Now, when you drop the chips into the oil, they're going to bubble quite violently, so be careful. That basically is the moisture escaping from the chips. So when you push the chip under, you can see the bubbles coming out there. That is the moisture still escaping. So we need to keep cooking until those bubbles almost stop. We can then take it out of the oil and pop it onto some paper towels and let them drain. Now, you might be surprised that very little oil remains on the chips. It's not particularly greasy. Now just come in here, take a look at these. I say take a look, take a listen. They're beautiful and crispy, and they're really not that oily at all. I experimented with doing these in the oven before, and I think these came out even more tasty and probably less oily than the oven ones. And they're so crisp, you could open a tin with these. But today, I just want to talk about actually seasoning these. And there's some tips I want to share with you when it comes to seasoning tortilla chips. Whatever seasoning you decide to go for, just say we take a little bit of salt, pop it onto our tortilla like that, turn it to the side, and most of it is going to drop off. And this is particularly true if I want to add a little bit of paprika or chili or other flavors in there. If I pour that seasoning into the bowl and coat it over, it's just going to drop off the chips. So what we need to do, if you think about sand when it gets on your hand, it knocks off easy. Talcum powder doesn't, so we want to make a really fine seasoning. So with a grinder or mortar and pestle, I've got about a tablespoon of smoked paprika. I'm going to add about half a tablespoon of salt. It's just a regular table salt. And what we want to do is grind this up. And so that instead of having salt crystals, we've got more like a salt powder. And I'm going to take a little bit of this and just sprinkle it over my chips. And then we are just going to toss the chips in the seasoning. In effect, we've made a seasoning powder, and don't just stop at smoked paprika and salt. You could add lemongrass in there, you could add coriander, dried herbs and spices. Whatever you do, grind them up nice and fine, coat them, and you're going to have these really delicious, super crunchy, super flavoursome tortilla chips. Have some fun, play with these. Let me know what you come up with, what different recipes you come up with, and share the love. Share this video with your friends and family. Be good. And I'll see you for another Mexican recipe very shortly on Steve's Kitchen. See you then.